In this chapter, we're going to take a look at the circulatory system and the respiratory system. And we're going to focus on that of humans because obviously we are humans and that's what we are going to identify with the most. We're going to speak broadly first. So in animals, a circulatory system is basically a system within the body that facilitates the exchange of materials, providing a rapid, long-distance internal transport system that brings resources close enough to cells for diffusion to occur. So basically, it is the transport system of nutrients and wastes around the body of an animal. And in the circulatory systems of different animals, the important thing is that the system has to reach every cell. So there's going to be different kinds of setups for different kinds of animals. There are two different types of circulatory systems within animals. Some animals have what we call an open circulatory system, and others have what we call a closed circulatory system. An open circulatory system is where fluid is pumped through open-ended tubes and flows out among the cells. So there's like this, heart-type organ within the animal. So we see here some pump of some kind, and it's going to pump the fluid, we usually call it blood, but it's going to pump the blood into open-ended tubes. See how these tubes are not connected here. So that's what we call an open system. And invertebrates like mollusks and arthropods commonly have open circulatory systems. So we see here in this picture, okay, that we've got this tubular heart. Okay, basically this whole thing down here contracts and is going to pump blood, okay, through these little open-ended vessels that kind of just bathe the organs underneath. And then eventually that, the blood or the circulatory fluid is going to make its way back to the heart type pump, okay, and do it all over again. So it's basically like this pump that kind of squirts out over all of the organs and then later gathers that to squirt it out again. Now, in a closed circulatory system, the blood stays within a set of tubes and is distinct from the interstitial fluid. Interstitial fluid just is fluid that is found in and among tissues of the body. So we've got, in a closed circulatory system, we have, looks like this, we have a pump still, okay, some kind of heart or pump, but this time, okay, it's going to pump through a closed circulatory system, so there's no openings, everything is kept intact. And closed circulatory systems are found basically in all other types of animals except, those invertebrates, mollusks and arthropods. So this picture down here is of a fish circulatory system. So it's got a pump or a heart type organ here, and the atrium are going to get blood from the body. Okay, and these ventricles right here are going to then recirculate that blood back to the body. You see that it goes to the gills first before it goes to the rest of the body in order to get oxygenated for the cells to use oxygen during respiration. So like I had mentioned earlier, we're going to focus on the human cardiovascular system. And so most animals are going to have what we call a cardiovascular system, which is made up of three main components: a pump, a vascular system, and some kind of circulating fluid that is being pumped through the vascular system. So in humans, our pump is what we call a heart. The vascular system is all of the arteries, veins, and capillaries, and the circulating fluid is what we call blood. The human vascular system is a double circulation system because we actually have the blood going to two main different parts of the body. We've got what's called a pulmonary circuit, okay, which is going to carry blood to the lungs, okay, between the heart and the lungs for gas exchange, okay, because we need to get rid of our carbon dioxide that the cells produce as waste, and we need to get more oxygen for the cells to use during respiration. We also have systemic circulation, which carries blood between the heart and the rest of the body organs in order to provide the cells of those organs with nutrients and pick up any waste products that they are expelling. So what we're going to do is talk about the path of blood in the human body. And we're going to start where it starts in the heart. So we're going to start with the right atrium. Okay, so the right atrium is here. Okay, I'll put a little number 1 right there. And the right atrium is going to get oxygen poor blood from the rest of the body. So the blood that comes in is not going to be very high in oxygen. It's going to be higher in carbon dioxide, okay, because it's coming from the rest of the body. Now, from the right atrium, it gets pumped to the right ventricle, which is down here. And the right ventricle is then going to pump the blood to the lungs. And it does that via the pulmonary arteries, which is this tube right here where number 3 is. So the pulmonary arteries take that oxygen poor blood from the heart to the lungs, and it flows through the capillaries of the lungs where gas exchange occurs. It trades carbon dioxide, so it gets rid of carbon dioxide and gets more oxygen in it. So now we've got oxygen-rich blood by the end of its travels in the lungs. So that oxygen-rich blood is going to return back to the heart via the pulmonary vein, which is this guy right there. So the pulmonary vein is going to dump this oxygen-rich blood back into the left atrium, number 6 right there. And from there, it goes down to the left ventricle, number 7. And the ventricles are much bigger than the atrium, much more muscular. So they have, when they contract, they have a lot more pressure on them. So that left ventricle is basically the biggest, strongest chamber of the heart. And that is going to pump blood to the rest of the body via the aorta, which is this big, huge artery that comes off the heart. It's called the aorta. And the aorta is going to split into smaller arteries and arterioles. And eventually, when it gets to particular organs and tissues, the blood is going to be carried to them via these arteries. Okay, so number 9 we'll say is arteries and capillaries. Okay, so there's capillaries within, the organs. Okay, so these guys are all capillaries. There's capillaries in your legs. There's capillaries everywhere. Wherever you've got tissue cells, there are capillaries where that gas exchange and waste and nutrient exchange occur between the cells. Now, last but not least, after all of that exchange has occurred between the cells, then the blood gets pumped back to the heart, okay, via veins. Okay, so these blue ones here, veins, that basically all kind of dump into the superior and inferior vena cava. Okay, and that we'll see is going to then, bring us back to number 1, basically, which is the right atrium. Okay, so that was the path of blood through the body. Let's take a look at a little bit more detail about the heart and how it works. So the heart is a muscular organ about the size of your fist that is located right underneath your sternum. It actually is kind of tilted to the left, so that most of the heart is actually kind of on the left side of your chest rather than really right there in the middle. Now, like we had said before, the atria, okay, these guys here, the right atria and the left atria, are going to collect blood from the different organs in the body. And the ventricles are going to pump blood to particular organs of the body. So the ventricles do the pumping out to the body, and the atria gather the blood from the body. Now within the heart, we have 4 valves that prevent backflow, from, the atria to the ventricles, so it doesn't allow any backflow. So we have a valve here, okay, that's called the tricuspid valve, and we have another valve here, so it doesn't go back into that right ventricle. And then we've got another valve here, okay, called the mitral valve or the bicuspid valve. And we've got a final valve between, I don't see it in this picture, but we have a final valve that is going to kind of close off when it goes to the aorta. And all of these valves, again, are going to prevent the backflow of blood back into the atriums where they came from, or the ventricles where they came from. And we can also see that the heart is kind of divided into a left and the right side. Okay, so the right side of the heart, okay, is going to be responsible for kind of carrying and dealing with oxygen poor blood, and the the left side of the heart is going to be responsible for pumping oxygen-rich blood. Okay, so we have this distinction between the 2 different sides of the heart, and that's really important because it prevents oxygen poor blood from being mixed with oxygen rich blood, because we don't, that would be kind of an inefficient system if we had the mixing of oxygen rich and oxygen poor. We wouldn't have as much oxygen going to the body parts as we would need. The muscle cells in the heart are going to contract and relax rhythmically. Okay, and that's how we get our heartbeat and stuff like that. It's very rhythmic. It's very timed and predictable. It's what we call the cardiac cycle. So a normal heart rate is between 70 and 80 beats per minute. If you're really in shape, you could get it down to between 50 and 60 beats per minute. And if you've got anything higher than 80 or 100 plus, then that could be a signal of something going wrong with your body. So basically there's 2 kind of phases of the heart cycle. We have a relaxation phase and we have a contraction phase. And the relaxation phase is what we call the diastole. Okay, so the diastole within the cardiac cycle is the relaxation phase, where the chambers of the heart are being filled up with blood. Okay, usually lasts about 0.4 seconds. Okay, so here in this picture, this is the diastole phase. Okay, where we can see that blood is going into and filling up the different chambers of the heart. So there is no contraction of the actual muscle. It's actually relaxing and letting all the chambers fill up with blood. Now the systole is the contraction phase. Okay, so the systole is when the atria and the ventricles actually contract, get a signal to contract, and push blood. Either if it's from the atria, it goes into the ventricles, or if it's from the ventricles are going to contract to pump blood to the body parts. So again, this phase also accounts for 0.4 seconds. 0.1 seconds is the atria contracting, and 0.3 of those 0.4 seconds are the ventricles contracting. Okay, so that's our systole. So diastole is relaxation, systole is contraction. So when the doctor is listening to your heart, you go for a checkup or whatever, and the doctor takes his stethoscope out and listens to your heart. He's listening for the systole and the diastole. Basically, it kind of sounds like a lub-dub kind of sound. They're also hearing for any other types of sound that's coming from the heart. Sometimes if they hear like a hissing sound, okay, among the normal lub-dub sounds, it's basically an indication of what we call a heart murmur. And heart murmurs can indicate a defect in one or more of the valves of the heart. So the valves are not shutting closed all the way, and so what you hear, that hissing sound, is actually blood being squirted or backflowing back through the valve that is leaky. Another possibility, so the valves, remember, are here and here, and between the arteries as well. There's also another possibility, and that is in between the atria, because when you're a fetus in your mom's tummy, your basically your right ventricle is closed off. Okay, there's very little blood that actually is being pumped to the lungs because you're getting all of the oxygen from the circulation through the umbilical cord. And so the right ventricle is basically being closed off. And so there's a hole in between the atria when you're a fetus to allow blood to go directly from the right atria right over to the left atria, and then to the left ventricle and out to the rest of the body. Okay, so that's basically kind of how it works when you're a fetus. Now, when you're born and you take that first breath, okay, that first breath, that pressure within your chest actually closes off. It slams shut that hole in the between the atria, and see right here, it slams shut that hole in the atria. Your first breath will do that, and then you get the rest of then you get the flow of blood actually through the entire heart. So the right ventricle then starts to work and send the blood to the lungs to get oxygenated now that you don't have your mother's umbilical cord attached to you any longer. So that's kind of an interesting little fact about fetuses and blood flow. Anyway, so there could be a little hole still there between the atria that doctors could listen for, and it would be part of this heart murmur that they're going to be listening for. Now, if you do have a heart murmur, some are very mild, others can actually be quite fatal. It can reduce blood flow and oxygen getting to your body, and it can actually cause death. So if your doctor hears any heart murmurs, they're definitely going to check it out. Probably usually doing an angiogram or angioscope to go check it out. If it's the valves, then they can be replaced with either artificial ones or ones from organ donors, or even other animals like pigs. Okay, pig valves have also been used in humans to replace the leaky valves. Like we had mentioned earlier, all the muscle cells in the heart are going to beat in unison. They all relax at the same time and they all contract at the same time in order for the heart to work efficiently. And so in order to relax and contract in unison, they have to get a signal from some place in order to all do that at the exact same time. And that signal is it comes from what we call a pacemaker. Usually think of a pacemaker as something old people get, in their chest when they get older and their heart stops working, which is true. That's an artificial pacemaker, but it's basically replacing your natural pacemaker that is within your heart. And the natural pacemaker is what we call the SA node. Okay, so the SA node, the sinoatrial node, okay, is basically here. Is specialized muscle tissues in the wall of the right atrium that generates electrical impulses. And those impulses are going to be sent down the heart. And those electrical impulses are hooked up to each each cell each muscle cell within the heart to make it contract or relax at the same time. So impulses are first going to go to the walls of the atria to make them contract and push blood into the ventricles. And then the signal is going to go to what's called an atrioventricle, or the AV node. Okay, that basically gives it, it's kind of like a little bypass. It gives it a little bit of time for the atria to contract and the blood to fill up the ventricles before the ventricles contract. Because if the ventricles contract too soon, then not all the blood from the atria will be pumped to where it needs to go. So the AV node is kind of a little holding point for the signal. And then after the AV node, okay, that signal is then released down to the walls of the ventricles and makes the ventricles contract to pump blood to either the lungs or the rest of the body. So that's how the heart is controlled, via these electrical impulses from specialized muscle cells within the SA node that is then delivered down the heart. So we humans have come up with a device that can actually pick up the signals from the SA node. And that's what we call an electrocardiogram. So you probably have heard of it. Another name for it, or the short name for it, is EKG. And that's going to, like I said, detect the impulses sent from the AV node and records them on a little piece of paper. Or if you've seen movies, the little, doot, 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 these things on the heart monitor that you see behind patients. It really exists. It's what we call electrocardiogram. And it's going to be able to detect abnormal heart rhythms caused by either heart attack or other heart disease. So basically, in this wave, okay, there's different kind of peaks that we have. The P, the P part of the wave, Q, R, S, and then the T. And they all signal kind of different parts of the heart contracting. So atrial depolarization, that means that this is the atrium contracting. This huge wave here is the ventricles contracting. And then this T wave is the ventricles relaxing. So that's basically kind of the shape. This is the normal shape that you should see. If, for example, the QRS wave is, very small, okay, that could mean that the ventricles are not getting their signal. They're not, pumping blood as efficiently or at all through the body, and so we've got a problem there. Same thing here. If this, atrial was flatlined, then the atrium isn't getting the signal to pump blood to the ventricles, which can't pump blood to the rest of the body. So there's problems there. So trained doctors can look at your EKG and see if there's anything wrong with your heart. All right, let's move away from the heart and take a look at the blood vessels that are attached to the heart that are going to be transporting that blood after the heart pumps it out. So the heart pumps the blood through 3 types of vessels. We have arteries that carry blood away from the heart. We have veins that carry blood toward the heart. Okay, so that's important to know. Arteries go away, veins go towards the heart. And then we've got capillaries that are going to basically kind of be in between the arteries and the veins, and that's the site of where gas exchange, nutrient and waste exchange occur between the bloodstream and the tissue cells. Okay, so the capillary beds down here within the organs or within the muscles or other tissues of the body. So when we take a closer look at the blood vessels, all of the vessels are lined with what we call tightly packed epithelial cells. Okay, it's just a particular type of cell within your body. And capillaries are basically the most basic type of blood vessel. because they are very thin. They're basically only one cell thick, so they only have one layer of epithelial cells that make them up. So they're very thin. So that allows for the gas exchange and for the nutrient and waste exchange to occur. If it was more than one cell thick, then that diffusion would be inhibited greatly. So capillaries are basically just one cell thick, so that the gas and the nutrients and stuff can easily diffuse through one layer of cells rather than 2, 3, or 4 layers of cells. So we can see that down here in this picture, where we've got the blood flowing through, and we can see little arrows of fluid and gases coming out of the cell here, and going the waste and stuff going into the blood vessels there to go back to the heart. Now, arteries and veins are more complicated. They have 2 additional layers. So they've got the epithelial lining. Okay, here we can see the veins. So this is the vein here, and this is the artery. And we can see in both of them that we have this endothelium, okay, which is the epithelial cells. We've also got some more additional layers. So the 2 main additional layers that we'll talk about are the outer layer of connective tissue, okay, and the middle layer of smooth muscle tissue. Okay, so here's the smooth muscle, here's the connective tissue, here's the endothelium or the epithelial cells. Okay, so the outer layer of connective tissue is basically going to allow for stretching and contracting of the arteries and veins. And the middle layer is basically going to be responsible for the constricting or contracting of the arteries and veins. And the reason why they need to be able to constrict and contract is to regulate blood pressure. Okay, your body wants to kind of be in homeostasis, which means like everything's running smoothly and the same all the time. And so your body usually wants to keep a constant blood pressure. And so in order to do that, your veins and arteries are going to constrict, okay? If the blood pressure gets too low, they'll constrict to increase the blood pressure. If blood pressure gets too high, they'll relax in order to kind of deplete or decrease, I should say, the blood pressure from there. So they have a very important job, not of only being the tubes in which the blood flow, but also regulating the blood pressure of within the tubes, so that we don't get too high blood pressure and one of them bursts, or too low blood pressure and blood cannot return back to the heart to get to the rest of the body. Let's take a look at the blood flow through arteries in particular. So your pulse is a rhythmic stretching of arteries during systole and diastole. So we can feel the pulse of that contraction and relaxation of the heart via the arteries, since they're the ones that are getting blood directly from the heart. Blood pressure, like we talked about, is the force that the blood exerts against the walls of your blood vessels. So the ventricles are very strong and contract with a lot of force that's going to push the blood through the arteries with a good amount of force. And plus, because the arteries are going to get smaller and smaller the further and further away from the heart the blood pressure is going to increase. So basically we record blood pressure as 2 numbers. We have a systole pressure over the diastole pressure. So the pressure inside of the arteries when the ventricles are contracting versus when the heart is in its relaxation mode. And so normal blood pressure is 120 millimeters of mercury over 180, not 180, 120 over 80 millimeters of mercury. If you are above 140 over 90, I believe, you'd be categorized as having what's called hypertension, which is high blood pressure. So remember, too much blood pressure can damage your blood vessels. So we don't want to have hypertension. So we want to keep our blood pressure at around the normal range. And then again, too low blood pressure, we can't get enough blood back to the heart to get reoxygenated to go back to vital organs, and so that is also dangerous as well. Now remember, at the ends of the arteries are capillaries. Capillaries are within the tissues of the body and the vital organs of the body, and this is where that gas exchange and nutrient and waste exchange is going to happen. So let's take a little bit deeper look at that. So blood flows continuously through capillaries in the brain, the heart, the kidneys, and the liver. So the major parts of the major organs of your body to keep you alive are always going to have a constant blood flow through them. All the other parts of your body will basically have a varying amount of blood supply diverted from one part of the body to another depending on need. So that's kind of where, after you eat, a lot of your blood is diverted to the digestive organs in order to help in breaking down, absorbing nutrients and stuff like that. Versus if you're exercising, then your blood flow is shunted away from your digestive organs and then more towards your skeletal muscles that are using lots of oxygen at that time. So we can get different amount of blood supply in different parts of your body depending on what is needed. Now, when we take a look at the capillary beds kind of at a microscopic level, we can see that there's an arterial end and a venous end. An arterial end is the end that's basically attached to the arteries that's branching off. And so in that end, we have pretty high blood pressure still from the force of the heart on the force of pumping the blood from the heart down the arteries. So that high blood pressure on the arterial end of the capillary is actually going to force the nutrients and gases out of the blood vessel into the tissues. Okay, so it's going to help aid in diffusion and kind of force it out there. Because remember that capillaries are only 1 cell thick. So we see here in the picture that on the arterial end, the blood pressure is about 32 millimeters of mercury, which is higher than the osmotic pressure, the interstitial fluid pressure of 22 millimeters of mercury. So if we subtract the two, we get a net pressure of 10 millimeters of mercury, forcing stuff out of the vessels into the tissues. Now, as blood flows through the capillaries, on the other side of the end is what we call the venous end of the capillary bed, and by that time, there's very little blood pressure that's kind of felt from the pumping of the heart. So osmotic pressure, again, the interstitial pressure is about 22 millimeters of mercury. That usually stays constant, but the blood pressure on the venous end is only 15 millimeters of mercury. So then we get that net pressure of 7 millimeters of mercury that's actually going to force waste products and other things from the tissues into the blood vessels. So on the arterial end, we get nutrients going out, and on nutrients going out of the blood, and then on the venous end, we can have the waste products being forced into the blood vessels for disposal of later. All right, so the last blood vessel that we need to take a look at are the veins. Remember, the veins are going to carry the blood back from your tissues and organs of your body back to the heart to get reoxygenated by the lungs again. So the blood pressure in the veins is pretty low because we've kind of lost that pressure through the capillary tubes. So the veins have pretty low blood pressure. So blood moves through the veins because usually they're going to be sandwiched between muscles that are going to be able to squeeze the blood kind of along as they contract. The veins also have valves inside of them. So arteries are, kind of smooth inside. Veins actually have valves within them, okay, that prevent the backflow of blood back down, with the force of gravity. So these valves are going to prevent the backflow of blood and make sure that blood only goes in one direction through the veins. So all of the veins in the body are eventually going to connect with each other and connect with the superior and inferior vena cavas that are, again, remember, going to dump the blood into the right atrium of the heart for recirculation. Okay, so we've taken a look at the pump of the circulatory system, the vessels of the circulatory system. Now let's take a look at the fluid within the circulatory system, and we call that blood. So the average adult has about 5 liters of blood in their system. So if you think about it, 2.5 2-liter bottles is basically all the blood that you have in your body. Now, of that blood, just over half of it consists of plasma. Okay, so about 55% of the blood fluid is what we call plasma. It's a yellowish liquid that contains about 90% water, and then the other 10% is the dissolved salts, proteins, hormones, and other nutrients and wastes that the body is going to circulate to the tissues. Now, the other, about 45%, okay, are suspended cells within the plasma. So the other 45% are made up of either the red blood cells, white blood cells, or platelets. So again, your blood has 2 parts. We have plasma, which is basically not cellular. It's basically water and dissolved salts and proteins and stuff like that. And then we have the cellular part, which consists of the red blood cells, the white blood cells, and the platelets. So let's take a look at the red blood cells first. Red blood cells are also called erythrocytes. And these are the most common types of cells within your blood. They're the most numerous. They've got little carbohydrates on the surface of them that are going to determine which blood type you are. Okay, so the red blood cells determine your blood type. And the red blood cells are red because they contain lots of hemoglobin, which is an iron-containing protein that transports oxygen. Okay, so that's why it gives them the red color there. Red blood cells, if we take a look here at the picture, okay, you can see that the erythrocytes are much smaller in size than the rest of, or at least the white blood cells. Okay, the smallest is the platelets that we'll talk about eventually, but the red blood cells are small in size. They have a particular shape that are like little discs with kind of like an indent in the middle of them. That increases the surface area for gas exchange. So it allows more oxygen to be carried by that type of shape rather than regular kind of globular shape. Red blood cells are, in order to kind of pack in as much oxygen as they can, they're going to be made up of mostly hemoglobin protein, and they're going to lack a nucleus and any other of the regular organelles that we see in other cells. So the nucleus and the organelles during red blood cell formation are actually going to be kind of spit out of the red blood cells itself. The other type of blood cell is the white blood cell, the leukocytes. There's actually 5 different types of white blood cells. There's monocytes, eosinophils, basophils, lymphocytes, and neutrophils. And they all have their different kind of roles of what types of invaders they're going to kind of take care of. But we don't need to go into detail with that. Basically, the white blood cells, you need to know, fight infection. Okay, they are larger in size than the red blood cells. They don't have any hemoglobin like the red blood cells. And the white blood cells are going to be more like what we see in regular cells. They're going to have a nucleus and all the organelles as well. And some of them we see have little granules inside of them. The eosinophils and the basophils have little granules inside of them. And these granules are going to be specific in helping those cells fight certain infections. So the white blood cells are definitely fewer in number than the red blood cells. But if you if your body's fighting an infection, then your white blood cell count will be increased during that type of or during that combating of the infection. Just kind of have extra reinforcements there. Now, leukemia is a cancer of the white blood cells, where some of these white blood cells of a particular kind, or it might be all the different kinds of white blood cells, are going to be kind of growing out of control. And so what that does is that kind of displaces the red blood cells, doesn't allow for a lot of red blood cell formation, and so you get tiredness, weakness because of lack of oxygen to the rest of your body, and eventually, if it's not taken care of, you die. Okay, so the third type of blood cell is the platelet, and these kind of they're actually pretty much cell scraps. In a sense, they're membrane-wrapped cytoplasm that's been pinched off of larger cells within the bone marrow. Bone marrow is where kind of cells are born, I guess you could say. And so these little platelets are kind of cell scraps from the bone marrow making different types of cells. But these cell scraps are actually really, really important. So we take this is a picture here, and these little tiny little dots are the platelets. And these bigger ones are the red blood cells. So you can see that they're very much smaller than red blood cells. So they would be super, super tiny compared to white blood cells. Now, the platelets are going to be responsible for clotting your blood. So if there is damage to a blood vessel, these little platelets kind of have these little sticky ends in this, so they stick to and adhere to the damaged part of the tissue, and they form these little this sticky cluster. You can kind of see here. This is a transmitting electron microscope picture of a little blood clot. So the platelets are going to be kind of sticky, and they're going to stick together. They're going to adhere and kind of form a seal around the break. They also are responsible for releasing what are called clotting factors, which are little chemical signals, like fibrinogen is one of them, that basically recruits other cells to help in repairing the damaged blood vessel. So they've got a very important job, because if you didn't have platelets or these clotting factors, then you would bleed to death with any little nick of a blood vessel. All right, so last but not least, when we're talking about the cardiovascular system, we got to talk a little bit about the cardiovascular disease. Disease of the heart and blood vessels. It accounts for 40% of all deaths in the United States is due to some kind of cardiovascular disease. Now, cardiovascular disease is going to affect the coronary arteries of the heart. So the heart itself has to obviously be fed with nutrients and oxygen as well. So some of the arteries that come off of the heart are going to feed the heart itself, and these are called coronary arteries. So you've got two coronary arteries. You got a right coronary artery feeds the right side of the heart, and the left coronary artery that feeds the left side of the heart. Now, if any of those become blocked, then you get very little or no oxygen and nutrients to the heart itself. So then it starts to basically die. And you have what's called a heart attack. It can't, your heart doesn't beat rhythmically anymore, and or just stops. So that's kind of the basis behind a heart attack. Now the way it gets clogged, okay, way the arteries get clogged is through atherosclerosis, basically, which is a fancy term for fat deposits on the inner lining of the walls of the artery. So that fat deposits, they usually call plaque. It's different from the plaque on your teeth, although they can be related, interestingly enough. People with lots of plaque on their teeth tend to have lots of plaque in their arteries as well. Anyways, atherosclerosis is the basis of coronary or cardiovascular disease, and how the arteries are, if you've got, lots of fat built up within your arteries, you've obviously have less volume, less space for the blood to travel in, and you're going to get less oxygen and nutrients to your body parts. So that's obviously not going to be a good thing, especially if this is happening within the arteries that feed your heart. All right, so next up we'll take a look at the respiratory system.